Alrighty, folks. Looks like we have Corey now. Welcoming to the broadcast now, one of my favorite tech writers and also a co-worker, Majority Report, writing the AM Quickie. Corey Pein, welcome to the show, author of Live, Work, Work, Die.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And I
Good
missed
to be
one
back.
work as I say that. Live, work, work,
It's a
work, die.
there's three works. Yeah, it's okay. I usually give people a pass, just like if they mispronounce my last name.
Am I doing
How it is.
that?
No,
Oh,
Pine is right. You got it.
okay.
I didn't mean
I
to
was gonna
put that
say.
idea in your head.
If after all this time. So we have Corey back to talk about a subject that's been kind of on my consciousness for a while. I remember back at 2007, 2006, when I was first getting into podcasting in the skeptic movement in the astronomy sort of sphere. They would talk about this privatization debate, and this was before I had like sort of strong socialist conviction. So at that time, it was sort of like I was hearing both sides of it. I'm like, ooh, I'm interested in these guys that say this is going to bring a lot of innovation. But it was kind of like settled. It was like, we're going to do this. And so, Corey, you have this piece in The Baffler. Let me flash that up for people. Um, that I think really, I sort of put the call out for anybody who's done a treatment of this issue. And I didn't know that you'd done a piece in the Baffler, Dawn of the Space Lords. You put up here, and I got this. Let me just share it so people see it. And so, I guess the first question is, we know like Elon now, like this whole generation. I feel sad that like almost like current younger generations don't really even maybe even have the sort of state NASA experience. But like, what was the public space program? And I guess you can maybe idealize it a little bit, and then you can, I guess, undermine that utopia a little bit. But before we got to this present privatization, where Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are leading us into space, what was this? What kind of situation did we have before?
Uh, well, back in the heyday of the space program, it was really a nationalistic uh, beacon. It was sorry. Got to deal with it. I thought locked him out, but it was really like considered the pinnacle of American accomplishment, with especially with the Apollo program in the 60s and 70s, where we sent astronauts that actually walked on the moon. Nothing like that has happened since, and obviously nothing like that had ever happened before. So it was a way of America sort of boasting about its technological and scientific advancement over other countries. And it didn't become a sort of privatized playground overnight. Even in 1962, when JFK, gave a big speech and said, "We choose to go to the moon," he talked about the jobs that would be created and the new companies that would be created to support that effort. But over the decades since, it's really become what you see today, which is this sort of pathetic picture of guys like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos launching their toy rockets, and we all get to watch as they explode and don't get anywhere near the moon.
Mhm.
And that was a process. It's interesting that you actually heard a debate about that, because the process of privatization really has taken place over decades without a lot of public debate.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that's been decided in closed rooms for the most part. So, and I can get into a little bit about the incremental steps along the way if you want. But
Yeah, well, I just want to like dwell on. I remember coming up, there was all this, and maybe they still to this day, this advertisement of, this was space technology, and there was this idea that like, and I think you're right. Like the sort of naive idea you have growing up is, oh, we went to the moon because we were just curious about science and stuff, and then you realize like, oh, if we weren't trying to intimidate the rest of the world with our technical prowess, we wouldn't have done that either. But it is interesting. Like, there's a JFK tape I've heard where he's talking with NASA advisors, and he's like, actually, I don't really care that much about space, right? Like, this needs to have some sort of practical impact. But to me, it's like, as cynical as that is, and like you said, the nationalistic element of it, it seemed like more. I don't know. It seems better than like we played the clip of Jeff Bezos saying, I basically can't figure out how else to spend this surplus cash. than rockets.
Yeah, I mean, why should Jeff Bezos be making all these decisions about
Yeah.
how humanity is going to interact with outer space? There's
Yeah.
really no uh, no precedent for it, and well, there is precedent for it. I mean, the colonial period of world history is probably the closest comparison, and guys like Jeff Bezos seem bent on remaking all those mistakes. And it was better when JFK gave a speech to the UN a year after that 1962 speech I mentioned, where he talked about peaceful cooperation among nations in the exploration of space. And that's an idea that's really been lost. In fact, it's illegal.
Right.
There was a law, an amendment passed called the Wolf Amendment in, I think it was 2011, that said because of national security concerns, the U.S. was no longer allowed by law to cooperate with China in space, or at least it needed clearance from the FBI, and maybe Congress needed to sign off. So since 2011, that's been an impossibility. And it used to be the sort of utopian idea underpinning the space program. Even if it was military, it's hard to disentangle it from the military applications of launching these rockets and gaining, space superiority over the Earth. That idea that there would be international cooperation was there. So I think you're in solid ground saying it's objectively worse now when nobody's even talking about that.
I know. I thank you for bringing that element up, because you could forgive 8-year-old me for not knowing that we did this because of rivalry with the Russians, because there's the International Space Station, and we're doing all these news stories of look, we are doing international sort of missions together and stuff like that. And yeah, to hear that was outlawed, that is really, I mean, hugely scandalous. But you wanted to talk, or if you want to go on that, but I do want to give you the opportunity to talk about the nuance of how this actually did move into a privatization thing. Because, like you say, I think what I heard on the podcasts on Bad Astronomy or whatever was mainly, or Neil deGrasse Tyson was sort of maybe a manufacturing consent for decisions already made.
Well, guys like Neil deGrasse Tyson, I mean, he's got different politics than Carl Sagan, who he kind of emulated, And so on issues you really see the libertarian stuff come out with guys like Carl Sagan, or excuse me, with Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye. They're very friendly to industry, and they get a lot of their support from industry. And so they're very sympathetic to it. And it's really been industry's push that enabled this privatization to happen. So NASA was partnering with companies from the very beginning, but it wasn't really until the 70s that it started outsourcing heavily. And then in the 80s, with the Reagan administration, legalized private space flights, and you can argue about whether that was a good thing or not, but it wasn't really a possibility until then. And then in the 90s, the Clinton administration set up an Office of Space Commerce under the Commerce Department, which was really coordinating how privatization in space would work, finding opportunities for companies there, and then shaping the policies that would allow it to happen. And really, I think some of the worst legislation in this area that passed was introduced by now House Speaker, then just another representative, Kevin McCarthy, and signed by Barack Obama in 2015. And it allowed American companies to claim as their private property things that they find in space. So this is set up to help develop asteroid mining, a very hoped-for lucrative area, to encourage private satellite developments like Elon Musk's Starlink, and to create an incentive for American companies to lay claim to what they find in space in a very colonial manner.
Well, I mean, sorry not to cut you off, but I think it's an important point to make is that, regardless of what we do internally in this country, which is usually fucked up and very also colonial as well, there's a lot of gall to say that oh yeah, that those rocks, like the solar system, you can own those things by decree of a government of a territory on the, on the planet.
Well, it's absurd, right? And it's really at odds with a scientific mission. I mean, Elon Musk, his plans for colonizing Mars are really, I've heard some astrobiologists say that if he actually achieves anything like it, it would be the end of scientific discovery on Mars. Now, let's say there's microbes on Mars or fossilized evidence of past microbes. Now, what's going to happen if Elon Musk sends his crews up there and they start digging up rocks, siphoning up water? That is where the evidence for extraterrestrial life would be. And you'd have these companies with a mission of profit, essentially getting to decide what scientific research is done.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get to whether or not these guys are even good at it yet in a second. But I mean, I do think that like this is like space as a subject is such a good spot for like social satiation. I don't know if you were a Star Trek socialist, Corey, but I know a lot of people like had a lot of people I've talked to, like they had some kernel of their radical politics come from like science fiction, thinking about a better future. And like so many good high school, college stone conversations on the couch around like a different way of living do seem to revolve around space. And like, this is just a very clear example of something that like, regardless of even what the history is, like the aspiration is something that should be collective, should be like human centered, right? Being just directly threatened by these private interests and private corporations, in a way that I think a lot of people aren't even wrestling with, like just how serious like these questions could be, as you were just saying.
Well, the idea of whether they're capable of achieving these things is one thing, but as I wrote in the Baffler piece, it's somewhat secondary about whether they can achieve it, because what they're asking for is a free hand from the government to operate as they please in space. Yes. Jeff Bezos wants to build he's not so into colonizing Mars. He wants to build an orbital platform like in that movie Elysium, where all the rich people can go. And he wants to, once that's done, he says, then we can turn Earth into a nature preserve. So it's like, okay, so who's going to execute the mechanics of that? Jeff Bezos? I mean, is he proposing?
Well, the rest of us, like the poor, will be the animals in the zoo, right?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. That's like Colonel Sanders saying, I'm going to be vegan in heaven. Like, sure, man. Like how, like, I just don't buy that. Like, yeah. Or Elon Musk being like, oh, probably direct democracy. I mean, leading up to that point, we're going to like massively abuse our workers. But once we're there, we're going to do the direct democracy.
Yeah, it's a bit of a charlatan's promise. You can't trust them. And pretty much the only person in the U.S. government that's complaining about any of this is Bernie Sanders. Maybe not a surprise to your audience, but when I was doing my reporting, I found very few vocal critics apart from him who are actually in a position of influence. And I'm not sure he's actually in a position to change, this decades of policy drift in favor of privatization. I'm not sure what it would take. I mean, I'm of the mind that, the United Nations is the appropriate venue for these things, but there are treaties that would restrict private activity in space that the U.S. is not a party to and hasn't ratified.
I think that's really like what I like about the pieces, like to the extent, and why I think David's right in saying this is a radicalization, because like to the extent you take these issues seriously, like extraterrestrials or like space travel to other systems, it needs to not be authored by these guys, because like the way that they say like, okay, that asteroid's ours. That's exactly the sort of behavior that would make us be very afraid of a visitor from another solar system, right? If all of a sudden they decide, oh yeah, actually Earth, nice water you got there. We can use some of that, right? Like that's exactly, it's just us projecting our current values. And it's like, again, what David said, the colonial period, like Francis Drake, all these, like they're pirates for states to colonize places. And that's literally what these guys want to be, is they want to be the pirates.
Well, it's not just us. Yeah. When you talk about us projecting our values, it's not really us. It's this sort of, patriarchal, old-fashioned idea of who innovators are and who explorers are and who scientists are. That is very colonial in that tradition. And, when you even drill down into the workplace policies, this is another argument against privatization. I mean, SpaceX, allowing rich people to buy tickets to go up into space, you're not going to see the same diversity of different kinds of people going into space and doing that work as you would if the federal government were doing it. It's just a fact, and it's already happening.
Sorry, this is a very parochial point, but like one thing that always made me happy as like a Texas guy and somebody who's also very interested in space, or just as a Southerner, it's like so many of these characters were just like, they were just like Bubbas, right? They were just like redneck guys who the government would hire. Obviously, a lot of them came out of the military or whatever, but they were just like guys from small towns across the South that they're just like, you're going to be like the first person to go out into the universe, right? Really, really amazing. And like, I'd prefer the government with its limitations, maybe having a more representative body of people having access to that than just like, do you have, what is it, $250,000 or whatever to just blow away, to be in orbit for 5 minutes, as the kind of line for who gets to go to space.
Well, it's not just diversity in hiring. It's also, workplace safety and other rules that are, they don't just come out of nowhere. They're actually important for getting the job done right, and, at least 8 SpaceX Starship rockets have blown up in the last 3 years. The most recent being a couple of months ago over Texas, and creating a huge environmental problem that there's now lawsuits over and things like that. That shouldn't be happening. But when you look, SpaceX, as I discovered reporting my book, has a nickname among people that are the cohort to go work for it, and it's SlaveX. And it's the kind of company where you might do a 12-hour shifts, or have to wake up at 3 a.m. to answer an email from Elon Musk because it's so urgent. I mean, that's not how you like sending humans into space, or even just objects into space, is pretty refined work. And it shouldn't be done by people pulling all-nighters like they're doing Silicon Valley software or something. It's fundamentally different.
So we do a lot on Musk here, particularly in like Boca Chica with SpaceX and the damage just there. But we haven't really covered Bezos's company and like the other ones that are like getting into this privatization. I mean, could you give like the audience a little bit of like the state of play, for these companies at the current moment?
Yeah, sure. I think the first one that people might have heard about was Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic. I'm not sure the state of that. I think he's had to sell off some assets recently. A lot of these are money losers, money-losing projects, sort of billionaire vanity projects in a way. Jeff Bezos has Blue Origin, which, as your clip said, he peels off Amazon profits and pours them into this project. As far as working conditions and stuff go, it's reputed to be similar to SpaceX, which is not great, and probably the engineers and astronauts would be happier in the federal workforce, I would imagine. And then you've got SpaceX, which is sort of the flashiest of the bunch, and maybe the most diversified in terms of what it's doing. I mean, SpaceX is also launching these Starlink satellites. We mentioned earlier how hard it was to disentangle space exploration from military programs, and that's really obvious with Starlink, which has become a crucial part of Ukraine's war effort, and which Elon Musk sort of show another way that this kind of privatization is really biting society in the ass. At first he said he was going to support Ukraine's war effort with Starlink networking capabilities out of the goodness of his heart for free.
Yeah.
After a couple months or a few months, he says, actually, this is costing too much money, so I'm going to need the Pentagon or Ukraine or somebody to pick up the tab for this. And the Pentagon was like, are you serious about this? Like, I think he eventually backed down because the PR backlash was maybe more than he anticipated. But he's really following a tech industry tried and true business strategy there, which is embrace, extend, and then extinguish. So you give the product away, you get people to embrace it, and then you turn the screws. And regardless of how you feel about U.S. support for the war in Ukraine, I mean, that is a pretty shady thing to try to pull.
Yeah.
And you can imagine how it might work in other domains. And part of the reason these billionaires are willing to pour so much of their own, profits, their own money into these projects is they want to own the space infrastructure. Because as countries get more invested in space, whether that for military reasons or genuine, scientific curiosity, what have you, to own the infrastructure that allows it to happen really extends their power, not just in space, but on Earth as well.
I mean, it's a wild time where Elon's kind of branded himself as a bit of an outsider. That you say in your piece that I think the Chinese space industry envies his closeness to the U.S. government as a contractor.
Yeah, well, my understanding is that China just announced a manned mission to the moon for 2030. I think Russia is aiming for one around then too, but I guess I would say China is more likely to achieve it based on their recent performance in space. But China does have, despite being a communist-run country, does have a lot of private companies involved in its space program. My understanding is, though, that most of them are get regional funding. That may be changing if they're trying to do a manned mission to the moon, but yeah, from what I read, Chinese companies that are in the space industry are jealous of Musk's access to decision makers in the U.S.
So let's play now. I do have this direct lead in to Jeff Bezos. He's talking to a guy for Business Insider, I believe it was. And this is what he was talking about right before saying, I couldn't figure out what to spend my money on. Oh, crap. I have to. Sorry. I need to just refresh and I'll be right back.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, while Matt's doing that, I mean, could you talk a little bit about the waste that's going on right now in space too? Because that's something that's, unless you're ready, Matt, you know, like the way that some of these companies are operating in our atmosphere, right, isn't always the most conscientious of like the future.
Yeah, they're leaving a lot of junk in space, which poses a threat to the existing space station and other spacecraft that are already up there doing scientific work. There's a lot of concern about pollution, like polluting the sky, the night sky as well, so to make astronomy harder and things like that. But you know, it's funny. You look over the sort of policy wonk discussions about privatizing space, and actually space junk removal is supposed to be the next big market.
Will be a booming industry, I'm sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm saying like we'll get around to that when we can figure out how to monetize it, and not a second before.
Exactly.
Here is Jeff Bezos right before talking about how he can't figure out how to spend his money.
So when you go study homelessness, there are a bunch of causes of homelessness. Mental incapacity issues are a very hard to cure problem. You know, serious drug addiction, a very hard to cure problem. But there's another bucket of homelessness, which is transient homelessness, which is, you know, a woman with kids, the father runs away, and he was the only person providing any income. And they have no support system, they have no family. That's transient homelessness. You can really help that person. And you, by the way, only need to help them for like 6 to 9 months. You get them trained, you get them a job. They're perfectly productive members of society.
Last week we had Bill Gates for dinner here.
Isn't that wild?
That is wild. So for people who are maybe watching later, then Bezos goes on to give his famous line that the reason he's investing in space is he has no place to spend his money.
And one of those buckets, I guess, just to circle back, was people that were not intelligent enough or too drug addicted. To have a home. So, I mean, that's the guy who, just decide, well, you just decide, like, that's the thing is like, what is this for now? Because like we had this idea of, space exploration, but now when like Elon's rockets blow up, I'm not thinking, oh, we learned a bunch in the failure to get us to the Saturn next time. I'm glad that went up, because anything you did learn would have been proprietary information anyway.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything that these guys don't know how to solve? It's a wonder there's even any problems in the world at all, considering that we've got these oligarchs, with essentially absolute power through their money. They know about homelessness, they know about space. They're really the biggest Dunning-Kruger syndrome cases around.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. I mean, well, let's talk about the practicalities now, if you don't mind, Corey, because, big claims. I mean, I know there's the fight between Bezos about whether or not Mars or the moon is a more viable target for the near future. But in terms of because like, all right, let me devil's advocate for a second. Like the argument I've heard from some folks, even some people who were involved that I know who've been involved in the space industry, the argument that they say is that space exploration is very expensive and it's difficult and there's a lot of potential failures. So why not let the rich and powerful, as Bezos said, just sort of burn their money because they have no other place to do it, versus the government. I mean, how effective have these folks been at like what they're sort of setting out to be? Maybe starting with Musk, who's the boldest and the brashest out of all of them.
Not effective at all. I mean, according to Musk, in 2017, the missions to Mars were supposed to be underway last year. So, they're always there's a thing with timelines in tech. I think the magic number is 5 years. Like if you just say it's 5 years out, nobody is ever going to be able to call BS on you because it's far enough. It seems like, oh yeah, if there's some serious obstacles, maybe they can get that figured out in 5 years. But it's also long enough that people aren't going to remember that you made the false promise when you did. So, yeah, I think the proof is in the pudding. And so far, all they've managed to do is take some rich people and celebrities up into space for joyrides. I can't. The next Blue Origin project is to create basically an office park in space for companies that want to locate in orbit to do research or marketing or whatever purpose. And it's just interesting to me that the biggest idea he could come up with was to recreate the suburbs in space. I mean, it's pathetic. Really, it's really pathetic. Musk's ideas for Mars are kind of half-baked as well, but he seems to have, his idea for terraforming Mars was to drop nuclear weapons over the poles and dissolve the ice into water. And apart from, the military strategy involved in giving a guy like Musk, who we've all seen how erratic he is from his ownership of Twitter, nuclear weapons to play with.
Jesus Christ, please no.
Again, it raises the issue of who should be deciding who gets to do that. What humans have the authority to decide the future of an entire planet, just based on what? The fact that they built successful capitalist enterprises.
PayPal, right? Like,
Yeah.
what I mean? It's like,
Again, I ask, like, when we assess like extraterrestrial, if they were thinking about like, okay, using a nuke on another planet, that would be called threatening behavior, and that's like the first step we're taking on this planet.
Well, in his dreams. So I think what the left should be advocating for is international cooperation and a oversight, I guess, would be the normie word to use. What's the oversight on SpaceX right now? I think with the last explosion in April and on the environmental fallout of that, people should be taking a hard look and saying, well, where's the oversight been? Has there been a deficit in oversight here? And, really digging into the details of these contracts. How many extensions are they getting? Mm-hmm. Are they actually delivering on the promises? I mean, I have some of the same questions that you posed because I haven't seen the nitty-gritty of some of these contracts. And is it just, as Bernie Sanders has been asking, why are we shoveling money to these billionaires? I mean, shouldn't the civilian oversight really not only be setting the goals for the programs, but tracking, the performance as well?
Let's be really clear about that, because I think that's an important point too, is the idea that like it's like self-funded.
It's not, though. It's not self-funded. I mean, neither of these companies would be in continued operation if they weren't getting government contracts. I think it's because of the practicalities of space, of the laws that are there, the military interest. If Bezos and Musk did not have cooperation from the government, they wouldn't be in this business. Mm-hmm. So, I can see someone who I think a lot of engineers and scientists joined these companies because they were frustrated with the slow pace of the government programs. Space exploration hasn't been very sexy for the past few decades. So the idea that there were these hotshot, billionaires willing to pour their money into it was pretty enticing, I think, for a lot of employees who then found the sad truth that they're working for Silicon Valley a-holes who also, can't deliver on the core product.
I mean, it's like, sorry, man, go ahead after this. I was just going to say that, like, it's a devastating thing. I've been lucky to know a lot of scientists, and it's just like devastating how much scientific research in this country now is so beholden to the power of like the rich and powerful. right? The free exploration, scientific inquiry. Like there's a lot of like, I don't know, like pop ideas about what that is, that there's just people working in nice government labs, but more and more of those people are just exposed to the most brutal aspects of the American market, right? And like it truly limits what we're able to do.
Yeah, I think, it's going to be really interesting to see how these Chinese and Russian moon missions pan out in the next decade or so, and what happens with the U.S. space program. I don't have a lot of hope that we'll have a whole paradigm change and get back to the ideals of international cooperation in short order without some kind of, something would have to happen to inspire that. I don't know what it would. Maybe just a change in the U.S. position would be enough. I'm not sure China would be running its own space station if it was easier to cooperate with the International Space Station, for example. But, what you do have in these different countries is competing systems and competing models of how to get there. And I'm not sure that the U.S. strategy, which is right now focused on lowering the cost of getting to space, and that's how do you do that? Same as in any industry, by squeezing labor. I'm not sure that's going to work out for us. So, yeah, go ahead.
There's a Neil deGrasse Tyson quote that I want to anticipate this objection. It says only rich and famous people flew in airplanes in the 1920s and 30s. Then it became a whole industry. If you were around back then, are you saying are you saying stop wasting your money on this stunt? And I gotta say, like, first, I don't think that history is exactly right. I think like there's a lot of state investment, particularly around World War One, that really kicked things off. I don't think it was just like rich guys, doing super planes. Like I'm imagining some sort of like steampunk rich guys with their fancy flying. No, there was massive state investment in this stuff, and to the extent that like they became through, being a consumer product more democratic. It's not because rich people liked it that way. Like it's not like they didn't resist that every way. I don't know. Just what do you guys think about that? Like rich guys flew so we could all fly later.
It sounds pretty dubious to me, and not to mention glib. I mean,
Yeah.
like, I'd like to know what his source is for that. It sounds like something he kind of made up off the cuff, almost. Like, which rich guys? Are you talking about the Wright brothers or what? Like, what?
Because like to me, it's like I don't know. These sort of transportation decisions don't really happen that democratically, and that's like this is just the new frontier of that, right? Like it basically decided. There was the rail era. You go ahead, David.
All of this we're seeing right now is like it's like the height of the like contradictions of the American state, right? Like the America was like dynamic, yes, because of like colonialism is this unique position in the world after World War II, etc. But also there was like an effort that like the state needs to play a major role in innovation and in technology, right? You can talk about the purposes of that or the interest in that, but it was always there. And what we're seeing right now, like, is like I don't know, like a perfect culmination of so many aspects of state investment have been completely privatized. There's always private interest. I think you can make the argument in American government policy and what it's investing in, but right now it's like we have to find a way to make sure that some rich guy feels that he's going to get enough of a return to do anything. And it's tremendously wasteful. It's sad because it's stagnation, right? It's the sense of nothing can really get better. We just sort of have to hope that nice Mr. Bezos and nice Mr. Musk can maybe have our best interests in heart. Maybe they don't want to nuke Mars. Maybe they don't want to turn the moon into like an offshore factory for making t-shirts or something like that. But it's really dark.
Well, it's really, it's disappointing when you read the language of the legislation that's passed over the years and the agency reports. Over time, commercialization of space became a goal in and of itself. So you could tell that the space program was succeeding because so many more companies were getting involved in launches and putting satellites into space and things like that, making money, trying to make money, and that it's just a really impoverished vision of how we interact with our environment. Space is part of our environment, right?
Yeah.
It's just part that
Yeah.
we can't live in without a lot of support,
And it's
technological
like
support.
Elon gets to simulate the progress of all these. So basically for like the investors, instead of like, oh, look, we got this new type of tunneling thing. It's like, does that look all that different than how they do tunnels in Belgium, for instance, or wherever? But it has to be sold as like, ooh, this is the cutting edge of everything. And you know what? I just say, I hope China kicks our ass to the moon. And I would love it if basically what happens to American space program is what happened to American basketball program in the mid 2000s, where we started getting bronze medals, and we have to get serious about getting the best talent, which is not these jokers, in charge of it. But Corey, is there anything else you want to say on our topic for the evening?
No, I think that about covered it. We covered the whole space, so to speak. Sorry about that.
My rim shot.
Thanks a lot
Corey,
for having me.
Where should people follow your work?
Well, these days, most of my output is for the AM Quickie, which is Majority Report affiliated newsletter at amquickie.com. It's 5 days a week, but only 3 of those days are free. And I'm still on Twitter. I'm trying to get a Blue Sky invite.
Me too. Yeah, if anyone has them, send them to us 3, please.
My Patreon for my podcast, News from Nowhere, is still up, but I haven't put out a new episode in quite a while. So, that's there if you just like what I have to say. But yeah, check out the AM Quickie. We recently launched a premium product, and I try to cover basically everything you need to know in a day in 1,500 words or so in a morning email. So check it out.
There you go, folks. Corey, thanks so much, man. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Really. See you guys.
See you.
Man, yeah, fucking makes me sad.
Yeah, I'm looking at Neil deGrasse Tyson right now.
Dude, he's so bad with that. I mean, the fall off from a Sagan to a deGrasse Tyson is massive.
Yeah.